The wind swept down from the ridges like a wild thing loosed, howling through the firs and rattling snow from the burdened branches. Wes Carter cinched his scarf tighter around his neck, the wool stiff with frozen breath. He adjusted the strap on his rifle and pressed deeper into the woods, boots crunching through the untouched drifts. He'd been up here most of the winter. His cabin, half logs, half desperation, stood hidden about 5 miles back down the mountain, nestled in a grove of spruces near Clearwater Lake. It had no power, but it had a stove that burned hot and a cot that was almost level. The point wasn't comfort. Wes had left the cities behind years ago, not in protest, just in fatigue. The silence suited him better than the noise ever had, but he still had to eat. Today's snow was crusted and old. It hadn't snowed in 2 days, which gave him hope he'd be able to track something decent. Rabbit, maybe a doe if the wind was wrong for her, but nothing had crossed his trail in the last hour. He shifted his rifle and kept walking. 3 hours passed, no fresh tracks. His breath steamed around him, thick and slow. He was starting to consider heading back when something made him stop cold. A track. It wasn't far off, just beneath the overhang of a rock where the snow hadn't filled in. At first, he thought bear, but it was too long, too narrow, like a canine, but what kind of canine had claws that size? The pad marks were spread like it had weight, serious weight. Wolves didn't get that big. He squatted beside it, glove brushing the print. The scale was absurd. From pad to claw tip, it was longer than his boot was wide. He stood slowly, scanning the tree line. The silence had changed. Wes knew the woods like a second skin. You spend enough time in them, they start whispering things. Right now, the trees were holding their breath. He kept his rifle low but ready and moved off trail, following the prints. He found blood first. It was faint, a spray, then a smear like something had stumbled. The track was deeper now. Whatever it was, it had been wounded. Then he saw it. At the far edge of a frozen clearing, standing half behind a dead pine, was a wolf, only it wasn't. It was too tall, shoulder high as a moose. The fur wasn't right either. It shimmered, not glossy, but reactive, like the snow around it kept glinting off the coat in strange patterns. Its head was wrong too, longer, flatter at the top, eyes set farther apart than any wolf should have. It bled from the flank, a gash that still smoked in the cold. When it saw him, it didn't snarl. It stared. Wes didn't move. The thing let out a low sound, not a growl, not exactly, more like a hum. It started to step forward. He raised the rifle. The wolf thing hesitated. Then it lunged. The shot echoed like thunder. The animal dropped halfway across the clearing, crashing into the snow and skidding to a stop. Wes didn't lower the rifle until the body was completely still. He approached carefully. His boots punched down through the crust, legs trembling with the sudden drop in adrenaline. Up close, the creature was even more unsettling. Its muscles twitched as they died. The eyes were glassy now, a dull amber. He knelt beside it, looking over the wound. One shot, clean. It had torn through the side, a lucky hit between the ribs. He should have felt something. Relief? Regret? He only felt cold. As he stood to leave, something moved again, not the beast, something behind it. A whimper. He paused. Another whimper, higher pitched. He walked past the body, toward a thicket where the snow had been disturbed. He brushed the pine boughs aside and stared. 2 pups. No 2 small versions of the thing he'd just killed. No bigger than a cocker spaniel each. They looked half-starved, one with its paw tucked under like it had been limping for days. Their eyes blinked up at him, not yellow like the adult, but a strange blue-white, flecked with color like cracked opal. They didn't run. One tried to stand, then collapsed back into the snow. Wes looked back at the adult, then back to the pups. He knew he couldn't leave them. Not here, not to freeze or starve or be torn apart by whatever else lived out here. He didn't decide, not really. He just moved. Wes pulled off his pack, laid down his coat, and gently wrapped the pups in it. They didn't resist. One gave a soft squeak as he lifted them, the injured one trying and failing to protest. He slung the bundle against his chest and started the long walk back. By the time he made it to the cabin, his legs felt like rubber. It had been nearly dark when he left the clearing, and fully night by the time the lantern's glow greeted him through the window. He shouldered the door open, kicking snow off with each stomp. The fire was nearly out. He threw wood on, stoked it, then laid the pups near the hearth in a box lined with old shirts. They shivered for a while, but soon curled together and went still. Wes sat down, poured half a thermos of the broth he'd brought, and finally let the weight of the day settle on him. He'd killed something he didn't understand, and brought home 2 more mysteries that needed food, care, and probably a hell of a lot more than a wood stove and a patch of cloth. But they were breathing. They were warm. And that would have to be enough, for now. They made a chirping noise when they woke. Wes had been chopping kindling just outside the cabin, but the moment he heard it, a high, rhythmic trill, he dropped the hatchet and stepped inside. The box near the fire was empty. His gut clenched. He scanned the room. There, beneath the table, a twitching mass of fur and limbs. One pup had dragged itself under the bench. The other sat watching him from atop his old boots, tail stiff, like it hadn't yet decided whether it was threatened or intrigued. Wes knelt slowly. "Hey now," he said, keeping his hands visible. "You two weren't invited to redecorate." The one under the table let out a soft warble. Wes reached toward it cautiously, palm open. It didn't snap. Instead, it blinked those strange blue glass eyes and pressed weakly into his touch. He scooped both up, placing them back in the box with a couple fresh rags and a bit of his last rabbit meat, boiled soft and cut thin. The pups sniffed the meat with hesitation, then attacked it like they'd never eaten anything warm in their lives. Wes watched them devour every scrap and looked toward the fire. If they kept this up, he'd need to set traps again soon, real soon. 3 days passed. The smaller one, he'd started calling it Micah, still limped on its front leg, but both had begun to walk more steadily. They didn't bark exactly. They used that strange vocalization, sometimes chirping, sometimes humming, occasionally something that sounded alarmingly close to human whistling. They didn't like cold water, but they were obsessed with watching snow melt. Micah even tried to eat a chunk of ice, then wailed as it numbed her gums. He found himself talking to them more than he meant to. By the 7th day, Wes had rigged up a barrier to keep them confined to one side of the cabin. He reinforced the door, just in case, and he'd started a logbook jotting down every odd behavior they showed. He couldn't explain why. Maybe part of him knew this wasn't just some undiscovered mountain wolf. Nothing in these animals' biology felt accidental. Then came the day the larger pup, he'd started calling him Flint, stood on his hind legs and reached the window latch. He only nudged it once, but Wes saw the way his paw curled. Not like a dog's, almost like fingers. He watched the latch for 10 minutes after, mind-reeling. It hadn't just been a paw swipe. It had been a deliberate, practiced motion. Flint hadn't been trying to play. He'd been trying to open the window. That night, Wes didn't sleep well. He sat with his rifle next to the cot and a lantern burning too long. The pups snored quietly across the room, completely unaware of the growing suspicion in his chest. A week later, the first stranger arrived. Wes had been checking the trap line, his shotgun slung and boots soaked through from a surprise creek crossing. As he stepped out of the forest line, he saw at footprints. Not his. Not boot prints either. Shoes, big ones, tread pattern unfamiliar. He crouched, traced one print with a finger. No animal weight to it. Evenly pressed heel to toe. And they were leading toward his cabin. He sprinted. Branches whipped his face. His lungs burned. Snow sprayed up around his legs. When he burst into the clearing, his heart jumped. The door was open. He raised the shotgun, stepped inside. The air was still warm, the fire alive, but something was wrong. A coppery smell, burned wood, Then he saw it. The far wall. A small square cut had been burned into the logs. Not clawed, cut. Precisely. The pups were gone. No, 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 no. He turned, frantic, but before he could step out again, something slammed into his back and he was down, breath punched from his lungs. Everything went black. When he came to, his vision swam. He was tied ropes dug into his wrists and ankles, cold floor under his cheek. Still inside the cabin. Someone else was in the room, muttering low. Not English. Not any language he knew. He rolled onto his side. The man, or what looked like a man, was crouched by the hearth, poking through his supplies. Tall. Movements too smooth, too exact. His face was human enough, but pale to the point of translucent. Veins like silver vines traced up the neck. The man looked at him and smiled. You made contact. Wes stared, chest heaving. What? You survived an encounter with a proto-lupine. You even managed to kill it. The man's smile widened, like he was genuinely impressed. You don't even know what that means, do you? Where are they? The man tilted his head. The juveniles? Alive, for now. You kept them in good condition, surprisingly. I'm not here to hurt them, Mr. Carter. I'm here to prevent a panic. Wes gritted his teeth. You're not with the government. The man chuckled. Neither are you. He stood and walked closer. Wes tensed, expecting a blow. But instead, the man knelt beside him and reached into his coat. He held out a small black object, no bigger than a ring box. Your wolf was a scout, an early-stage migrator. Her kind don't usually birth in this climate. They shouldn't be here yet, but something went wrong. What is that? The man shrugged. Insurance. You open this, you'll get them back. You also won't sleep for a week. Your choice. He placed the box on Wes's chest, stood, and vanished through the door. Wes lay there for a long time, blood pounding in his ears. Eventually he rolled onto his back and looked at the box. It was warm. He opened it. The instant Wes opened the box, the temperature in the room dropped like the air had been sucked out of it. The fire flickered, dimmed, and for one disorienting moment all sound vanished. Then a sharp pulse shot through the cabin like a deep bass note with no source, rattling the windows, vibrating through his teeth. He flinched, dropping the box. It hit the floor without a sound, split open, and spilled out what looked like a sliver of mirrored metal. It hovered. Then the metal unfolded. No hinges, no seams. It shifted like liquid, coiling mid-air, before locking into a complex shape, a lattice, shimmering with a faint internal glow. A projection burst from it, washing the room in pale blue light. And then, images. Not like a video, more like flashes from a memory, disjointed and raw. The adult wolf? No, the proto-lupine lying under a canopy of stars, breathing hard, sides heaving, a ship, not crashed but sunken into the snow as if placed deliberately. Two smaller figures, Micah and Flint, curled beside her, squeaking for warmth. And her eyes, not feral, not panicked, focused, intelligent. Then another image, a view from above, three figures in environmental suits, approaching. One of them the pale man kneeling beside the pups, scanning them. The adult growled, but didn't move. She was dying. The memory froze on her face. Not a monster. A mother. Wes blinked as the light dimmed. The metal sliver snapped itself flat again, clattered to the floor, inert. He sat back, breath shallow. It had been communication. Maybe even a plea. The woman, the creature he'd killed, hadn't been hunting him. She'd been running from something else. He moved like a man underwater, cutting his wrist ropes with the knife the pale man had left on the table. He barely registered the sting. His thoughts churned. The pups were alive. The man had said so. And this device, this was the trade. He turned it over. A small groove ran along one edge. He touched it, and a faint click sounded. A new projection appeared, this one a map. Simple topography, the mountains rendered in soft wireframe. A blinking point marked a location 10 miles northeast. Higher elevation, deep snow, dangerous terrain. He packed that night. Not out of heroism, out of responsibility. He left before sunrise. By late morning, his legs ached with every step. The air was thinner up here, and the old avalanche paths made every detour a risk. He moved carefully, one eye on the map sliver, which now hovered obediently over his glove. The closer he got to the blinking point, the more uneasy he felt. Around mid-afternoon, he heard it. A low thrumming, not a helicopter, not an engine he recognized. He crested the ridge and froze. Below, nestled in a natural bowl of ice and stone, was a ship. Not wrecked, perched. Its surface pulsed faintly with light, like it was breathing. The hull had no seams, no obvious doors, just a central panel open. A ramp extended onto the snow. Wes descended carefully, rifle slung, but ready. He stepped onto the ramp, and the metal warmed under his boots. As he moved inside, the interior lit gently ahead of him, guiding the way. He passed through an antechamber that resembled a laboratory more than a cockpit. Equipment lined the walls, some clearly for scanning, others that looked suspiciously like restraint devices. And then he saw them. Flint and Micah, inside a transparent enclosure, sniffing nervously at the air. They saw him and leapt at the wall, tails wagging in a strange, serpentine rhythm. "Hey," he breathed, relief blooming hard and fast in his chest. A voice behind him said, "I thought you'd come." Wes spun. The pale man stood there, this time in something closer to a uniform. It shimmered faintly, like the ship's hull. His expression was unreadable. "You killed one of the few adults ever to survive deep atmosphere descent, but you saved her young. That complicates things." Wes didn't lower the rifle. "They're going home with me." The man raised a brow. "You misunderstand. They are not livestock. They're not even pets. They're transitional life forms. We don't fully understand them yet, but we do know they adapt to local intelligence signatures." Wes frowned. "What does that mean?" "They imprint. And not just emotionally, biologically. Behavior, pattern recognition, even elements of speech structure. You've been feeding them, caring for them, talking to them. They're just babies." "No," the man said softly. "They're mirrors. Whatever you raise them to be, that's what they'll become." Wes stepped forward. "Then all the more reason I take them back." The man considered this, then turned. The enclosure dissolved. Micah bounded out first, then Flint, both pressing into Wes's legs with trembling relief. Wes dropped to his knees, arms wrapping them both. The man waited. Finally he spoke. "You'll need this." He handed Wes a metal disc. Thin as a coin, heavier than it should be. It records their development, sends anonymized updates to a listening array beyond lunar orbit. We won't interfere, not unless something goes very wrong. And if something does, then you'll already be out of options. Wes nodded once. As they left the ship, the ramp sealed silently behind them. By the time they reached the tree line again, snow had started to fall. Back in the cabin, Flint curled beside the fire, and Micah climbed into the basket of split wood like it was a throne. Wes removed his boots, tossed a couple fresh logs onto the stove, and leaned back in the chair that creaked like a stubborn mule. He stared at the coin-shaped device, then tucked it into the cabinet beside the old radio. They'd grow fast. He'd seen enough to know that already. They'd learn faster. But they were his responsibility now, and whatever came next, they'd face it together. Spring in the high country came slowly, dragging its heels and melting snow with all the urgency of molasses. By early May, Wes could finally see bare earth along the southern slope, green sheets speckling through patches of brown pine needles. The lake had started to thaw, edges breaking into slush that glistened in the pale sun. The pups, if they could still be called that, had grown. Flint now stood almost waist-high, shoulders broad and movements silent as shadows. Micah was leaner, quick on her feet, her gait still favoring that old front leg injury but compensating with a grace Wes hadn't seen in any wild creature before. Their coats had darkened, hues of deep gray and blue depending on the light, like they'd absorbed the palette of the winter sky itself. They understood English now, not just tone or rhythm, but meaning. One morning Wes had said, "Wait here," and both had sat still until he returned 15 minutes later. Another time, after a misstep sent Wes tumbling into a ravine, Flint found him within 5 minutes, dragging the emergency satchel in his jaws. Micah followed with an urgency that bordered on panic. But it wasn't just comprehension, it was memory, pattern. They'd started mimicking sounds they heard, even vocal inflections. The first time Wes had caught Micah humming the start of the radio's weather jingle, he nearly dropped his coffee. Still, they didn't bark, they didn't growl, they sang. Short sequences, almost melodic tones rising and falling like speech but without words. Wes had taken to recording them on a small handheld device. He sent updates with the coin-sized transmitter, which blinked quietly beside the wood stove, like a firefly trapped in metal. He kept it half buried in a jar of dried rice, out of sight. Then, one night in early June, the signal changed. The transmitter blinked red. He'd never seen it do that before, no sound, just a red pulse. He stared at it for a long time before finally placing it in the center of the table and sitting down across from it. Nothing happened for 5 minutes. Then the voice came, not aloud, but in his head. Not invasive, just there. Request acknowledgement. He didn't speak, he just nodded. The transmitter pulsed blue once. Observer tag 213. Unexpected neurological pattern drift detected. Juvenile imprint exceeds cognitive expectations. Memory recursion loop forming. Please confirm continuation of containment protocol. Wes swallowed. You're asking if I want to keep them? No reply, just another blue pulse. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, Micah chased the wind through the open clearing, springing over fallen branches with fluid joy. Flint watched from the edge of the trees, alert and calm, eyes on the ridgeline as if he understood what watch meant. They weren't pets. They weren't his children. They were something else, something that had never been meant to happen. And yet they had. He returned to the table. Yes, I confirm. The transmitter's red light faded. It blinked green twice, then turned off. It never turned on again. The next few weeks passed quietly. They hiked higher up the slope now, Flint navigating switchbacks like he'd lived there for years. Micah became obsessed with the sky. She would sit for hours watching the clouds, tail twitching whenever a plane crossed overhead. One afternoon, Wes brought out an old atlas. He showed them maps, roads, cities. Micah tapped New Mexico with her paw. Flint looked at Alaska and made a low, thoughtful sound. I'm not saying we're going anywhere, Wes told them, just giving you context. They didn't answer. But the next day they brought him a dead squirrel and set it on the porch like a gift. Flint nudged the atlas under the door with his nose. On the first real warm day of summer, Wes packed the truck. He wrapped the transmitter in cloth, stowed it in the glove box. Micah jumped into the cab without hesitation. Flint hesitated, then looked back toward the cabin. Wes crouched beside him. You don't have to come, but if you do, we stick together. We move quiet. We don't cause trouble. Flint looked into his eyes for a long moment. Then he climbed in. They didn't drive toward any cities. Wes headed north, then east. Quiet roads, empty land. He didn't have a plan, not in the traditional sense, but he had time. And now he had company. A month later, in a wide valley near the border, he parked the truck at the edge of an abandoned ranger station. The roof sagged, and the porch was half swallowed by weeds. But the view was good, and the lake nearby still glittered clear. He spent the first few days patching up the roof, and fixing the generator. Flint made a perimeter. Micah found a way onto the roof and refused to sleep anywhere else. And every night, as the sun slid behind the distant hills, they sang. Not loudly, just enough for the stars to hear them. Wes sat by the fire with a mug of lukewarm coffee and a rifle that hadn't been fired since winter. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know what Micah and Flint would become. But he'd learned something about himself. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't surviving something impossible. It's choosing to keep going after